these guys to entertain us.
All right, thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone. So we're getting towards the end of the conference here, and we've had a number of presentations that have touched a bit on Java modularity throughout the show. I just did one before. And so this is a chance, I think, to get some people to have a perspective, perhaps different perspective on modularity and what happens in the future, because we've got OSGi, we've got Java Platform Module System, to have a conversation amongst ourselves with you and sort of think about what a future might look like. So the first thing I want to do is just let everyone have a chance to introduce themselves. And so we'll start with Andy.
So hi everyone, my name's Andy Guibert. I'm a software engineer at IBM. Currently I work on the Open Liberty / WebSphere Liberty project. It's like, I don't know, somewhere around like 2 or 3 million lines of code. And I've been kind of leading the effort for having that code base support Java 9, 10 and 11, and figuring out sort of how it can work in the context of JPMS. I also work alongside Tom Watson, who's kind of been leading the charge as far as doing experiments. So I don't have much experience using raw OSGi per se, but hopefully I can kind of offer the perspective of a first large code base trying to adopt JPMS and at least work inside its rules.
Hello everyone, my name is Sebastian Zarneko. I'm a consultant at Itemis, and since 10 years I'm doing framework development now. So I was pretty excited when Java 9 module system was announced. So in the end we got what we got, which is probably not as bad as everyone thinks, but adoption rate indicates something else. So yesterday I tried to share my thoughts on modularity and dependency injection here in the context of Java 9, and yeah, looking forward to the discussion now.
My name is Peter Kreens. I've been involved with OSGi a little bit longer than BJ, since 1998, I think it is. I've been in an almost continuous struggle till I gave up about 2 or 3 years ago with Sun at the time, and later Oracle, about the module system, which they initially started, I think, 2003, 2004.
Yeah, JSR 277 might have been the first attempt.
Yeah, and my opinion about JMS, basically...
JPMS?
JPMS, whatever.
Too many acronyms. Too many acronyms start with J.
It's the biggest self-inflicted pain I've ever seen in the software industry, and I've seen quite a few pieces of self-inflicted pain. I don't see what the value is. If you compare it to what you can do with OSGi, we could have done OSGi better if we would have had support from the VM, much better, and it could have been done 15 years ago. What we now have is a shallow module system that puts so much problems in place that need to be fixed. The only thing what I really like about JPMS is...
This is you introducing yourself.
Okay. I thought I had to make my position.
No, this is introduction.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Anyway, so it's clear Peter Kreens, don't like JPMS.
Yeah. You can hold it for now. All right. All right, and I don't know if you were all here before, but I'm BJ Hargrave. I'm from IBM. I've worked on OSGi for almost as long as Peter, since the late 90s. So I'm very familiar and intimate with the OSGi technology, worked in all of spec releases, and one of the roles I fill at OSGi is the CTO. So I have a long history with modularity and all of the various failed and now current attempts at putting modularity in Java. And so that's the panel. So we have, I think, some different perspectives, and so now we can have a discussion, right? I guess maybe I'll kick something off, right? As Sebastian mentioned, right? I think that we see the uptake of JPMS is a bit shallow, right? So it's sort of it's challenging. At one point, I tried to look out and do some analysis. Says, well, how many modules are there in the real world? But it's hard to ask that question of Maven Central. So we tried to figure out how to do a query that says, well, how many jars in Maven Central have module info classes in them? And it's sort of not easy to ask that of the search features that they have. And I didn't really want to download the internet onto my computer and then look at it. But, and then we also try to run a query against GitHub that said how many projects in GitHub have module info class file, Java files in them. That also seemed to be almost impossible to run. But so
Indicated very few.
yeah, I mean, but I wasn't confident in the results. But basically, it doesn't look great. Anecdotally, it doesn't look good. I mean, even the few attempts that you see out there, right? Because as I mentioned in my presentation before, I think in order for progress to be made, certainly for Java modules, it has to start at the leaf nodes of the dependency tree, right? So step one, the loggers have to modularize. Step two, the bytecode libraries, the basic things that themselves don't have dependency chains, and then we can build ourselves up. But even that seems to be making slow progress, right? If you look at, for example, SLF for J, right? 1.7 is the current release. 1.8, they're trying to deal with modules by moving from hard-coded impl names to where they just confine them with basically class for name to using the service loader. But 1.8 seems to be stalled in the beta stage forever. So I don't really see real progress in advancing the number of modules. So I think that it's not happening, right? So I don't know what that means for the industry with respect to Java 9.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to say on that is I know both Sebastian and BJ have touched on the lack of uptake on JPMS, and just to put my perspective out there, I'm quite skeptical of JPMS as well, but I think it's definitely something that could potentially be a force to be reckoned with, and I think the lack of uptake right now, even though Java 9 has been out for quite a while, it's important to note that Java 9 and 10 were not long-term supported releases. They just had a 6-month life cycle each. So really, and Java 11 has only been out for about a month, and that's the first proper Java release since Java 8. So I know within Open Liberty, we support Java 8 today, but we skipped right over 9 and 10. I mean, we tried to stay as up to date as we could, but no one is going to run Java 9 or 10 in production because they're not supported JDKs. So it'll be interesting to see as Java 11 matures, if that helps shift the uptake of JPMS at all, because I think that's when people are going to start to give a real serious look at the new features of Java 9.
Well, but to follow on, I think you're right. Java 11 is the long-term support, which means enterprises may consider deploying it, but that wouldn't have stopped any library developer in the open source world from preparing for it, right?
It wouldn't have, yes, but making your library compile, to have a module info file, it's a .java file, so it needs to be compiled. In order to compile that, you need to run your build environment with Java 9 or higher. So
and we get multi-release jars.
we have, yeah, and now BND supports it, so that's good. But I guess if I'm an open source contributor and I have my library and I want people to post bug fixes and stuff, I'm gonna use the most popular supported JDK, which for a while was still 8. I don't want to make my library compile on Java 9, because then any contributor that wants to just do a simple bug fix needs to then go download Java 9 or 10 just to build the library. So.
Where's David?
We want you to build modules, but you can't build them until the system's reliable, so you can't even experiment. Can I say something just to the point of view? A couple of years ago, this is probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was a open JDK project Penrose, and I was involved in that. And one of the things that we did there was we basically created an alternative approach to module info of Java, which was module info of JSON. So basically, with the same
Awesome idea.
Why not the manifest? It's already there. No, it would be too simple.
Even when your only tool is a compiler and a VM, everything has to be source code and class files.
Yes, of course, that makes sense. maybe. But the adoption rate, coming back to this one, I think it's not as bad as we currently picture it, here in this discussion, because this automatic module name thing was sprinkled around all the manifest files, so most of the artifacts are kind of module path ready, so even the leaf ones. So the situation maybe could have been better, but it's not like super nasty. Question would be why does no one adopt it? And I'm really good with names. I'm with Andrew. So since Java 8 was the last proper Java release, we are really waiting for the adoption with Java 11 or maybe the subsequent releases when we eventually get some kind of killer feature that's built on top of the module system. So far it's just more or less a gimmick, and people are toying around with it, but it doesn't provide any added value, and that is the main issue here. So putting work into something that doesn't provide some obvious benefit, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think, like, for example, in Java 8, you saw a massive adoption because people wanted to get to Lambdas, right? People were desperate, so they were willing to do it. But JPMS doesn't add enough value to drive me to Java 9, 10, 11. Maybe when other things come in, like value types or coroutines, something else, then the clamor will be there. People will move, and then maybe modules can follow in on that wave. Problem is that in 2 years after Java 11 comes out, we'll already be on Java 14 or 16 or whatever the hell the number is. And so they'll never, it's sort of like you'll never know when to jump on the train because it's always moving.
But exactly, because my key question is, what do you get? I think OSGi proved, if you look at all the people complaining about it, that modularity is not easy. And JPMS is proving that it wasn't OSGi, it was modularity. So going to a modular system is hard work. And JPMS, if you do it, you get a fraction of the concepts that you get from OSGi. So it's a two-dimensional model of modularity, while there is already a 3D model of modularity around. Right. Right. And to your point, sure, you don't have to use modules to move up to Java 11, but the problem is that most of the libraries you depend on aren't going to work in Java 11 anyway, because they do something that they took away, like they use some misc unsafe. So there's a whole bunch of code now that, through no fault of its own, so to speak, doesn't run. Even if you ignore modules entirely, the code just doesn't run on Java 11. And we have this problem in the B&D build. I can't move to Java 11 because some dependency depends on a thing that no longer exists. So now we have to rewrite our code to use a different, newer version of that. It's just a pain in the ass. So it's going to be painful just to move up to Java 11, even if you ignore modules entirely. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, great.
So yeah, when I started investigating Open Liberty support of Java 9, initially we didn't have the kill switch, which for those of you who are not familiar, in Java 9, 10, and 11, we essentially have a free pass where modularity is disabled by default, and you can do deep reflection still into whatever modules, and you could you could enumerate the individual packages that you wanted to, you know, allow at JVM start time. You could enumerate the packages that you wanted to permit illegal access into, but that was, you know, for large systems like Java EE application servers, that was near impossible. So eventually, Mark Reinhold's arm got twisted enough that they came out with this option called the kill switch, which essentially disables all of the access checks for the entire JVM. And then it got twisted further, and it's the default option in Java 9, 10, and 11, and I think for the foreseeable future. But that's definitely a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, I think he may never be able to turn on because
yeah.
the world will explode.
Yeah. What? Yeah.
Yeah, who turns that on? Yeah. Okay, so another facet that I'd like to touch on with the panel is tooling, right? So one of the problems I think OSGi faced in the early days is we had no real tooling support. And we're getting much better now. B&D has massively improved. We've got Maven plugins and Gradle plugins and annotation support, and life is getting much easier. But I think JPMS also suffers from a tooling problem, right? Because when in particular, they explicitly excluded things like versioning from their requirements, and they punted it out to the tools, right? And so that's Gradle's problem, or that's Maven's problem, and they also, and especially with things as they begin to pull features away and multi-release jars, they didn't put any effort into the community to build the tooling story up to let you build those things to bootstrap.
So I think, yeah, the lack of versioning in JPMS is a gaping hole in the design, and they essentially, and when I say they, I mean Oracle, got away with it by assuming that everything would just be version 0, and that in some future version of Java they could introduce the module versions. But like BJ said, that's punting the issue to either the rest of the community or the future Oracle selves, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I think versioning absolutely needs to happen at some point. But since JPMS is part of the Java platform, I think it's reasonable to assume that at some point someone will pick up the banner and implement some level of automated tooling. We'll see how that goes.
Well, I mean, for example, in the Maven community and even the Gradle community, the work being done is just enough to survive, right? Make sure that it works on Java C from JDK 11, right? That it knows how to pass the dash release option or something. But the really interesting things aren't, that a practical developer might need, like multi-release jar support, just is almost impossible to do in tooling without, custom writing your own crazy POMs and build structures. And it seems to be they much, I guess you could accuse OSGi of the same thing. We built a runtime and didn't do anything about the tools for it until years later, and that hurt us.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's OSGi has a very steep learning curve without any tooling. Like tools like B&D tools certainly make it a lot easier and a lot more manageable when it just figures out all the stuff for you automatically. So we'll see if any tools pop up where they parse your POM and generate a module info for you, or annotations or something along those lines. But there's a lot of smart people out there like Tom doing experiments, and we'll see if someone in the ecosystem comes up with any bright ideas here.
Playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, so the tool support is actually not that bad when you look at the command line interface that the JVM ships. So of course you have to put everything together manually, but the important bits and pieces are there. Talking about multi-release jars, I'm not even sure that today's development environments can actually handle multiple Java files in different versions, building against different JDKs in the same project. So, and especially with multi-release jars, I'm not sure if they even solve an existing problem, or whether that was more like an academic exercise, whether they can do something like that towards the direction of supporting classes that are no longer there, or different implementations, I don't know. So that doesn't actually make me wonder why there's no support for multi-release jars, because I would say there's no real demand for this yet. So again, as soon as there is some killer feature that that requires multi-release jars, I would expect that tool vendors step up and just ship something that works decently. But there's
So how do you build your multi-release jars? Do you have some custom magic scripting?
as I said, the command line tools are awesome.
Well, I mean, it depends, right? If you have to do something different for 8 and 9 and 11, they're still useful for 9. But ultimately, you're right. I mean, that's why I said at some point in the future, they're going to stop taking things away because they'll have gotten rid of all the implementation stuff they want to hide. And after that point, right, in that distant future, then this bootstrapping solution isn't going to be needed, right? It's basically a hack to get us from 8 to this future when all of the things, right? I think part of the issue here, I think, is that they're slowly trickling out the torture, right? Instead of making everyone suffer everything all in one release by taking away everything, they're torturing us every release. Like it's like water drop torture. They take something away in 9, then they take something else away in 10, and they took unsafe away in 11. It's just like a constant drip of torture. Well, I mean, also, I think ultimately there's a bunch of stuff they want to take away, but they didn't just take it all away at once, which is the problem. And so as they take it away, people they want to write a library. They have customers that are using 8 and 11. So what do? Do you build 2 versions and tell them to figure it out, or you give them one multi-release jar that just works?
I would speculate part of that is because they have their own portfolio that runs on JVM. And perhaps when they look at the rest of their portfolio, they say, well, we can't take that out yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's a valid business reason for doing what they're doing.
Yeah, back when they were inspecting the APIs to remove for Java 9, I was actually impressed with the level of analysis they did on. They actually did attempt to go download as much of the internet as they could and evaluate, what libraries are using what internal JDK APIs, and for example, they found overwhelming usage of SunMISC unsafe. So they're like, okay, well, maybe we need to leave that one in for a few releases. But the low-hanging fruit they did take out right away.
Peter?
That is an example. Can they really take it away because it provides functionality that a lot of people actually really need? There's certain things you.
Right, they have to move the key function elsewhere and then encourage you to start talking to this new public API that does what you want.
Right, that's currently not there yet, is there?
Well, they must have. Yeah, so they took MISC unsafe away in 11, so they must have put in its replacement at least in 10, I assume. But unfortunately, the problem though is that people have code today that uses some open source library version 6, and that open source library got fixed in version 9 to deal with this problem. And of course, the other changes that happen between 6 and 9 are enough to break you, so it's not an easy migration to just up-level all your dependencies. You have to go back and change your code, and the ripple effect is painful, right? It's not like, because in the past you could take, my app worked on Java 7, my app works on Java 8. That doesn't happen anymore.
But I think the key question, because it's what I am noticing over the past few years, basically over the past 15 years, is that I don't see the real analysis that even if we do all this shit and all this misery, and what is the end result really delivering us? I think the JPMS with the service layer is a nice connectivity model, the service loader, but it still doesn't provide the kind of capabilities that you get from the OSGi service layer. So I think the real benefits of modularity that you can get, I don't see that happening for a very long time, even though we spend an enormous amount of energy in, I see the goal pointed out by a JPMS for me is very elusive. I don't see that there is a real user benefit in the end, even if we have done all this work.
Yeah, like as I said in my past presentation, I think it's a great job to modularize the platform. They hit all the points. The L requirements are perfect. They've hit the mark. It's just, does it translate to the real world of applications built out of 50 different parts and 12 different open source projects? And that, I think, is the open question, right? Will that happen? Even if we begin to build up a corpus of modules in the world, is it going to work, right? Because if I use SLF for J2 and I require some library that uses SLF for J2.1, what's going to happen? How does that work, right? Because they can't all live together on the module path. So that world, it doesn't exist today, right? Because there are no modules. And one day, all the modules will be version 1, and it will work. But then, in the not too distant future beyond that, some of these modules will begin up-leveling, and people will begin to use the up-level dependencies, and then the world begins to look less clear. So modules.
So I'm a little bit scared that they will piggyback on this multi-release idea, and that if you have a dependency to some library in version X, but also could potentially work with version Z, then you provide different implementations against those and just ship your own module once. It's like a very dark future that could happen.
All right, so we're nearing the end of our time here, so let's see what crazy questions our audience might ask of the panel. I think it's a challenge there. It's sort of like selling encapsulation is a hard sell. It's sort of like selling object-oriented, right? When you first tried to sell, C++ to a C programmer, he's like, I can write all the programs I need to write right here in C. It all works. What the hell does this give me? It doesn't add one single feature to my life, right? But ultimately, over time, we all recognize the power of encapsulation, the value of object orientation. But it's a long road, and right, the fact that it wasn't baked in from the beginning in Java is probably what hurt it, right? So this was baked in from day one, then we've all have grown up with it and dealt with it and understood it. But now it's the hard add-on sell. Yeah. Okay. So, any other questions, or do you have something you want to? Well, those things are from the platform, right? So you're going to have to look at the Java 11 docs and say the things they took away, right? So but basically, if you've been using real Java APIs, the public APIs, java.this, javax.that, unless it's one of the EE things, you're basically okay, right? And like the EE things, they took away Java XML bind in Java 11, right? So if you happen to have used that because it was there in Java 7 and 8, then you're in trouble on Java 11.
Yeah, the Java modularity is the kill switch is enabled by default in Java 11 still, so we don't quite feel the pain of JPMS yet in Java 11 because that's still turned off for us. But if you're going from Java 8 to 11, I can say from experience migrating the Open Liberty code base, the biggest headache there is the removal of APIs that they did, and I'm not talking just internal APIs, mainly like JAX-B, Corba APIs, JavaX RMI, things like that. So the removal of things that looked like proper Java APIs that were removed from the JDK, that's been the biggest headache, and especially if you need to be able to interoperate across both Java 8 and multiple Java versions, then it's kind of a tricky problem to deal with.
Okay, so we're I think at the end of our time here. One more couple of minutes. All right. Another question from our audience? Okay, do we want to have, oh, you do have one? Yeah. So, so like J-linking down to a subset? I think a lot of people are doing experiments with them. I know Udo, I don't know if he's here, but he did a presentation the other day about Software AG is using it to build apps, right? They have analysis tools that figure out for their OSGi framework and their bundles what modules they need so they can J-link their app down into a more compact Docker container.
And I can't speak from the JVM, but in Open Liberty, we use OSGi Modularity, and the Open Liberty runtime is like, say, 200 megabytes with the full thing. But you can, name the features you need and then run a tool similar to J-Link that compresses the Open Liberty image down to, say, like 30 megabytes. And that's been a very popular feature for our customers, and especially now that cloud is a thing, and you're paying for disk space, you're paying for memory. That's all been very useful. Yeah.
So I think, but that's actually probably an interesting area of research, because again, the Software AG has a proposal for an OSGi spec around that sort of introspection of the platform and being able to model them in the OSGi requirements capability space to do the analysis that would then let you clearly J-link your stuff down into a smaller image for sort of cloud type deployments where small is key still. It's amazing. We've gone back to the past when there was no memory and the hard disks were small and we had to be very careful now, and suddenly everything's big, but now it's back to small again. Yeah, that's the difference. You got to pay for it.
One last question. I think David has a question.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think the sort of the cloud world of Docker and the fact that people want smaller layers because they don't want to pay for, that is sort of compressing things again. So the cycle is back to small.
I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd very much like to thank our panel because several of them, in fact, most of them didn't even know they were doing it until